Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's New in Cloud FinOps, and a special episode today with.
Donald Burke here from FinOps for Finance.
And so today we're doing a crossover episode, I think they're called, where we've got both recording at the same time. So we're actually on video. So Frank and I are, I'm not going to say dressed, which is what we said when we were talking earlier, but presentable. And we are obviously joined by Frank as well. Hi, Frank.
Hello, and I have my red glasses, so that's perfect.
They're not quite the
Again.
same, but I like them. Frank.
I know,
I
I
will
know.
get used to them.
I'm the same. I'm still getting used to my new red glasses, but at least they're better than the small Harry Potter black ones. Let's move on.
Well, that's a matter of opinion. I just kept wanting to draw on your forehead. But today we're going to be talking about how to get into FinOps and careers. So it's going to be a bit of an all over the place episode, I think, but hopefully really useful because, Donald, you've been hearing this kind of question quite a bit coming up, right? And we've got quite different backgrounds.
Correct. Yeah, 100%. Like I started my channel because I suppose I'm a recovering accountant and the money's way better in FinOps. So if you're an accountant and you don't like balance sheets or general ledgers, why don't you do something that's a bit more interesting and you get paid more for it? So that's why I'm kind of targeting it at myself 4 or 5 years ago before I knew what the cloud was. And I thought Kubernetes was an exotic dish from Eastern Europe. So
I think so. My old team were a relatively non-technical team, so I was the only person that came from a relatively technical background, and they used to have like this in joke, which is, "What is a Kubernetes?" Is that the thing that everyone talks about it because it's this kind of technical term that's on this pedestal. And Frank, you've got a totally different background.
I have a totally different background. I come from exactly the opposite. I am fully technical, and at one point I was getting slightly bored of technical, and I've discovered that talking to humans, because I was a real geek, the one that is in the basement that doesn't want to talk with humans, and I discovered that talking with humans was making everything more complicated and more fun. So I started talking to people. And that brought also to starting talking. So I did a non-executive director diploma with Financial Times to learn the finance bits of it. So I come from exactly the other way around. Is I found very interesting that aspect of, I know the technical, but that doesn't explain me the strategy of the company. But all companies are driven by money. So all of a sudden, understanding that finance bit was really helping me connect the two. The decision of technical companies are usually non-technical but financial, and that was super cool.
And I can't believe that anyone who has met you, listened to the podcast, will ever believe that you hid in a cellar and didn't speak to people. You're one of the best people I know. While I I am the kind of person that likes to hide in my basement and not speak to people.
Wait to see me retired, old grumpy. That's me. But for now, I'm happy to talk with anyone.
So, I mean, my background's a bit mixed. I learned to program when I was 6 on a Spectrum ZX, not to show my age. I moved into school and went through that.
That happens.
But
that legal requirement.
But then I ended up running hospitality businesses. I mean, I've been a climbing instructor, and then I went into hospitality businesses, and then over probably about 10 years in that game. So I was a trained chef, I ran P&Ls, and then I decided to change career. I was doing about 100 hours a week. I was running quite busy places, running weddings and stuff, and I'd moved into operations management. So I was helping run a few different sites, but I was still running my site. And I said to myself, look, if they don't take out my site soon, I'm going to change careers. So I changed careers and I went into IT sales. And then I remember my interview, they said, "What's a server?" Like, as a question, but thinking people wouldn't know what a server was. And I was able to tell them because I used to run servers for my games. And so quickly I became kind of technical sales. And then we ended up buying a cloud consultancy in one of my organizations that moved into that. We were talking about this earlier, Donald. Got used to things like Slack, which is why I'm still called Stevo, because it was my Slack handle, because we had 5 Steves in the team of 30 people. Yeah. And then I was doing transformation consultancy. So I went into architecture, transformation consultancy, and I did this massive project, which was about moving 77 data rooms into the cloud. And you were trying to work out, and they were speaking to all 3 cloud vendors. just got really into the depth of the kind of spreadsheets which were built by a friend of mine called Ian, on what they should do where and why, and like building all this modeling out and like purely looking at the financial side. And that's what got me into it. I just found that side suddenly massively interesting. I remember me, a guy called Liam and Ian just sat there and said, this cloud economics stuff is really interesting and it's going to get big. Like as people start spending millions, because we'd started like proper DevOps side. So we were, moving people who were very retail focused and really using the scale. But people were suddenly moving these big lift and shifts, and it suddenly became massively interesting, the finance side. And I thought I knew about finance until I met Frank, and he sat me down in a room. He sat me down in the room and over 2 days taught me everything from his diploma that he thought was relevant to a silly salesperson like me. And that's what I went. But yeah, it's like we've all had very different backgrounds, haven't we?
But do you find a lot of crossover from something like running running weddings at a hotel, like the madness and the chaos of it all, and it's all about like you need the food out, you're trying to keep the guests up.
Yeah.
There's a lot of correlation between like customer facing stuff and FinOps because like you've got all these internal stakeholders that you're trying to keep happy. They all want different things at different times. They all have their base requirements, and you're kind of managing that. There's a lot of crossover there. There really
There
I don't
is,
know, but
but also in the flip side, as I used to say to my team, like no one dies if you miss a FinOps report. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
if you miss
Yeah.
the wedding, you might have a
Exactly.
wedding.
You mess up a wedding, like you're at risk of death, and certainly someone's going to cry. But in FinOps, it's always been difficult. So I've always kind of gone to. I think a lot of people see me as a very optimistic and low stress person, but it's from running the weddings. Like it's. I say to people like I
It's
still
in the
look for people
works.
on their CVs who have been in hospitality because it doesn't matter how smart you are, you've just got to work hard and you've got to deal with people, and those things are massively valuable. So, like the team lead I had in my previous role, she was absolutely fantastic, just a brilliant all round person, and could do anything. She was working for Michelin before she came to work for us. Never touched anything in cloud at all. It really doesn't have to be your techie background. You don't have to be finance background. You can be a salesperson. All you've got to do is have a really good grasp of numbers, right? And be able to deal with all those different personalities and people, like you say, Donald. Because I mean, some of them I've ran very different weddings, right?
Yes,
in the same way, and I've done very different consultancy projects in FinOps and worked internally in very different things. You've just got to be able to sit down with anyone in a room. I think this is what makes a successful FinOps practitioner. I'm not saying that I am one, but it is being able to sit down with whatever audience is, whatever stakeholder is, and just connect with them, be able to start speaking to them and make that connection. And I think your background will really help with the finance side, right, Donald? Because I think that's the ones who often feel the most, not going to say threatened, but it's a big learning curve.
And tell us about your background because you've let us do it, but you've not done it. I'm keeping track there.
Yeah, because it's kind of similar to yourself in terms, Steve. I did work in hospitality in terms of credit union. So I was talking to old ladies about the weather every Saturday all during college. And then I was doing a commerce degree, so a basic business degree in Cork and UCC. And then when I finished, I did accounting because effectively everyone else in my degree course was doing accounting. Like my background is in dairy farming, like my dad, uncles, aunts, grandparents, everyone's either a farmer, a vet, or married to a farmer or a vet. But it was too hard for me. I enjoyed my weekends, and the best time to be a farmer is during the summer, and I got terrible hay fever. So I was like, nah, there's no upside here. I'm gonna work in maybe finance. I enjoyed accounting and economics, so I trained at one of the big four accounting firms for 4 years.
Wow.
I was a terrible auditor, but I did get the grasp of the basics of how a balance sheet is constructed, how a P&L, variance analysis, and stuff like that across different industries, which is really a really solid grounding and understanding. Like when I started, I didn't know you had to do professional exams. Like this was kind of landed on me in the first week. They're like, I thought I was done with college, burned the books, had to dance around the fire, and it was like, what? 4 more years of this stuff, including I think the final exam was like 6 hours long. Yeah.
Well,
People bring in
I
suitcases
didn't
with
realize it's that
books.
long.
It's because it's open book, but like you're not going to learn it in there.
Yeah, it's
So
too
you've
much
got
stuff.
your
Yeah.
wheelie suitcase full of all your books with your notes and tabs. Any accountants listening to this are probably getting a cold sweat at the back of their neck at the thought of it. I did that for 4 years, and then at the time it was 2007, 2008. I went to Australia because again that's what everyone else was doing at the time. Everyone immigrated for a couple of years. So I worked as an accountant for a potato plantation in rural South Australia, and I learned more there than I did in the 4 years previously with a big four accounting firm. Like you haven't lived until you've tried to hammer out a budget with a packhouse manager and the planting manager for these massive potato plantations in the arse end of Adelaide. It was a really good experience, and using the data to drive some of the decisions because I was looking at the numbers and they were wanting these GPS tractors for harvesting, and I was just trying to square the circle. So that stakeholder management and engagement piece you talk about, Stephen, like you don't know that you're learning and layering that skill until you actually look back and you're like, that was really formative. And from there, then I worked in a variety of industries in a couple of different countries. As I made my way back, I ended up with a US multinational distributor of drugs as a revenue analyst. And there I got into kind of big data. So we were looking at 20, 30, 40 million lines of data every month and doing some calculations on those using an ETL, extract, transform, and load tool, and some data visualization stuff. So trying to say what's the variance behind this massive data. And then in 2020, the whole finance function in Cork got made redundant. So it was a real opportunity to be like, is this what I want to be doing? Do I want to be doing finance
hmm?
or do I want to try something different? And I started really enjoy that data analytics piece. And I found, unlike finance and traditional finance, no one says, geez, you did a really good month end close there. Those journals are lovely. I love your balance sheet rec. It's just like
Yes.
you get absolutely completely thankless. You're hired to just keep the show on the road and do the bare bones. Whereas the analytics stuff, you do it and they're like, oh, thanks so much for that analysis. It's really helped with our decision going forward and we saved X amount of money. And I kind of liken it to the IT guy that comes and fixes your computer. Like your computer is broken and
Yep.
he comes up and he fixes it and you're like, thanks so much. But all he's doing is he's doing his job, and he's getting thanked for it. So I moved into analytics. And I started working in sourcing analytics. So we looked at our spend, our bucket of spend, analyzing that data to try and get the best value for the business. And in doing that, I saw this line item called IaaS. And I was like, what is this? We're spending a ton of money on it. And it was infrastructure as a service. So I tried to kind of, being a data person, as the suggests, I tried to get into the detail of it. Say, oh, could I have the detail that makes up this bill? And they're like, yeah, you don't want to open that Pandora's box because that
It's
that's the
still the
cur
same today.
that you're looking for. Which, for anyone not familiar with FinOps and cloud, is the cost and usage report. So every time you spin up a machine, you're billed by the hour, by the second, by the machine. So it's thousands of lines wide, millions of lines long. Sort of like there's a whole discipline around cracking into this. So I started working with the Cloud Business Office there to help them with. They had a pretty good handle on compute, but I started looking at their managed service bits around a lot of RDS, Elasticache, Redshift, and also some RI marketplace stuff on the secondary marketplace. I built my first API to pull some data. And from there, I moved into a proper FinOps role, where I am now. I work as a cloud optimization consultant, which sounds like word soup that gets kicked out when you type it into ChatGPT. But effectively, I look at customers' environments and try and manage the commitments to maximize their savings and minimize the risk. And I love it. I love it. Like you're talking to people every day, you're saving them money. Like who wouldn't want to be in a job where you're helping people save money and talking to people, as you say, Frank? It's kind of energizing, especially
Yep.
in this remote world. But yeah, that's me.
I mean,
that-
and it's showing the reason I've got grey hairs and the reason Frank has none is if you go further back from the cur, You had the detailed billing file, and the cur is a staggeringly beautiful thing in comparison. I mean, it's massive. I mean,
And
strategically,
it's
I mean,
so
we very rarely talk about our companies, but because we're doing a one on career, it makes sense. But Frank, Strategic Blue handle like billions
yeah.
of
We
cur
think every
rows
month we have
a month. Yeah.
more than 1 billion lines analyzed and reviewed and stuff. So yes, it's a. And that's the thing. That was the interesting bit. Is what you were talking about is the curve file. This is the base number, and it is millions of rows. It can be inaccurate. There is a discipline, and yeah, that's what I like. That's why I work on a company that effectively does that day in day out. But it's
Your background's quite data related, Frank, right?
So my background is slightly it's data related. At the same time, it is curiosity related. So I had my own company, and as the CTO of my own company, I was changing what we were doing every 3 months because I was following the next shiny thing. The result of that is really, really good for me learning. It's the classical thing that every interesting person has something that they've done, they're happy they've done, and they hope never to do it again. But that was me. I had my company. I struggled with all the good and the bad of that. I had to hire people, fire people. It was good and bad. I've learned so much because I could choose whatever I wanted to do. And part of that was going into the data. And I found extremely interesting to extract from the data things that are not openly visible. And so I have some open source training I did with Steph Gooch. We did an interview on the AWS TV. And one of the things was to show how much is a Windows license. And you can extract that from AWS data, or you can extract things. So yes, background was very geek, so very data driven. And then I went into more and more. I was provided, as you said, Donald, is a source of data, which is extremely complicated. And then I started using that, and I found a company that effectively sees that as a positive, which I love. And what you can extract, how much can you more save? How much can you save on top? That meaning that has lots of things. Is we say Strategic Blue is we work mostly on that, also on that little bit, that additional 1%. That is as hard as the beginning 99, but that might be the difference, and that's the bit we work on, and I love it.
That definitely happens in the FinOps space in general.
Yep.
One of the things I think is interesting when you say you kind of go in, you help people make that saving. As you're a practitioner and you're in a place longer and longer, it actually gets harder to find more savings, right? And so it's not a career that stops. Like, you learn the first lot of things, and we were talking about this earlier, but it's amazing how many people you come into and are still brand new to it, right? And they're still asking those early questions. But you realize that just to remain relevant in the organizations you've been in, if you've been there for quite a long time, you're having to learn new levers all the time. Natalie Daly talks about this. To keep running, you've constantly got to be changing and learning. And so my background has gone slightly differently. So me and Frank used to work together at Strategic Blue, a company that didn't know they were a FinOps company before I arrived. I think that's fair to say, Frank.
Yeah, for the name.
Yeah, exactly. They were a bit technical, very financial, and did something really useful. I really enjoyed the people aspect. Frank always enjoyed that and helping organizations. And so we were very much commitment focused, but I would help out with some consultancy and helping out organizations with our friend John Bryant on what else they could do architecturally, because my background's architecture. And so I moved to a place called CloudReach, who were then acquired by Atos, and we won't talk about that any further. But I had a team of 17 people globally, from Vancouver to India, who would look after about 500 million of cloud spend, included, if you include Office 365 and Google Workspace and all this. So significant money. But I had really different people in there with very different backgrounds. I had a billing team who were just like data gods without knowing they were, right? And process, because they were building this. And so we found something like $200,000 of errors from the cloud vendors that they owed us money, because we were redoing their calculations. Exactly. I mean, when you're in that kind of percentage of money, it was significant. But we had that, and they had really different backgrounds. One of those had worked in energy. The lead, who was just fantastic, another brilliant person I worked with, was on the census previously. Like, worked on the census. It's just totally random. And then I had people who were very much analysts, following reporting schedules, using the tooling that we had in place, pulling the right things, put to customers, talk to customers about it, etc. And then we had a few of us who were more consulting, who were cultural, architectural, sustainability side as well. And the backgrounds were just so massively varied. And we used to have this thing, we used to try to hire people who didn't have any experience. The last person I hired in that role had been a physics teacher.
But explaining the concepts, like, and trying to communicate,
he'd won Young Mathematician of the Year at his university, so I knew he was going to be all right at maths and Excel.
Tick.
And if you can explain, logarithms to a teenager, you're going to be fine explaining, reserved instances to anyone. Right? And I think that's
an adult, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's massively important. It's that kind of piece. On the flip side, so one of the things you wanted to get out of this, Donald, was how do we, what advice would we give someone if they were joining? And maybe in this, we'll start with Frank.
Yes.
If you were just moving into FinOps now, knowing everything you now know,
yep,
where would you start? What would you do first?
I think Donald touched a point which was very interesting at the beginning, which is you start, his work is to cost optimization to reduce the cost. And then you added, Steve, and that the right thing, that there is a limited amount of things you can do there. Okay, there are a certain number of levers, but when it's done, it's done. A FinOps person need to fight for their life, so they need to sell the concept of FinOps. So starting with the cost optimization, the saving of money is important. But then if you're going to continue to have to fight for your survival just by providing savings, you're going to die soon because there is a certain amount that you cannot. So you need to build, I think what I would start is, yes, on one side, the cost optimization, and in particular, do whatever I want. If I were to start today, I would outsource the commitment management, and I would. But then, obviously, that's what I do.
Me too.
yeah.
But then I would.
I'm currently looking at a commitment management country, so I agree.
Then the next thing is I would start creating reporting so I can build trust with the executives, which are responsible for my survival as a budget. And so I would start working on this, showing the results, asking them questions, very simple, like, hey, what is success for you? What should I do? If I were to be successful, what in 6 months' time would I bring you? What would be the result? And so you can start managing expectation on both sides and building that trust. That's the second thing. And the last one I would say, which is important, is to understand that there is a shift of frequency. The frequency of things, trust is more important than frequency. So what I'm saying by that, and I say it when I do my forecast talk, is it's not, if you send even a weekly forecast to finance, it's not a problem. It doesn't have to be monthly or quarterly. It can even be regular, as long as it is correct as of now and with drivers. So we expect our forecast to increase by 20% because we've had a successful marketing campaign. So today that's happening. The next 2 weeks is, wow, what we've done in the past, we've repeated it. It works so well. So now 2 weeks after, I can tell you we're going to increase again by 20% because we've increased by 100% the number of customers. I think changing the mindset of it needs to be monthly and correct to, I'm going to keep you updated. Trust me, I'll keep you updated on a daily basis, or if needed, on what's happening, what is relevant for you, is a change. So summarizing 3 things, I'll start, yes, focusing on where can I save money, the low-hanging fruit, the usual things. I will start building trust with whoever is responsible for my survival as a budget, and I will start talking with finance in my case, because I'm probably going to be more on the techie side, building with them this, not a regular cadence, but an agreement that we will talk to each other when things happen.
Yeah.
And I suppose finance people love variance analysis. Like, they don't mind things change, but they want to know why. They want the story behind it.
And that's the missing bit most of the time.
Yes. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be defendable.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That's a big change. Yeah, that's what I always say to people. I said, your budgets, your forecasts no longer have to be perfect. They just have to be defendable, and notes, conversation. Like I say, I love that. It's about the trust. Right, Donald, you've come in from an entirely different side. You've gone into one of the areas that's probably the most complicated, I think, in FinOps in terms of like technically complicated in commitments. If you were to start your journey again, what would you do as your step one coming as a finance person?
As a finance person, you have to differentiate yourself, because a lot of accountants look at the numbers and they look at the way a company is structured, and they see, if I'm in the FinOps and operations vertical, I get paid X. If I'm in the IT vertical, I get paid Y. So I am going to move across to that IT vertical. So you need to get your foot in the door and get your train on the tracks in the first place. You need to differentiate. You can't just have your FinOps practitioner and insert cloud basic practitioner course here. You need something else to differentiate and some additional value. I think the data visualization piece, as Frank said, and being able to manipulate large volumes of data is paramount, because it's all about people. I think a large part of this conversation has been around stakeholder engagement, getting buy-in. You're talking to very different people, so building that skill set. If you can build it in your existing org, so if you're working in finance in whatever department it is, and you talk to the IT person, you say, are we using the cloud? What cloud are we using? Could I have a look and maybe I'll save you some money? That gets you the practical experience. And then you pick your differentiator from there. Is it, do you learn some Python so you can do some more interesting things with the data as it comes out, and that you build your own pipeline, that you're not relying on someone from IT to run a report to pull you the data that you need, that you can do it yourself? Because I've lost out in jobs before where they said, oh, so you're from finance, so how would you get the data? I'm like, I'd ask someone. Once I get the pipeline, I can do stuff, but I don't know how to. So if you can build that, if you can lay that pipeline and be self-sufficient, as Frank said, commitment management is probably the easiest thing to start showing value, and plus you can track it easier. The harder things then are the usage optimization pieces, and that's where you need to build a level of technical understanding, so that if engineers try and fob you off with, if you say, oh, why don't we modernize from M5 to M6G, we'll save 15%. And they're like, well, and they start speaking technical Cantonese, and you're like, I don't know what you just said. But if you can kind of understand at a base level what they're saying, and why they can't do that, or why they can't move regions, why do you love Northern California so much when it's 20% more expensive than Oregon, and it's the same side as the States. Being able to have that understanding and that discussion at that level, and then you bank that knowledge and you bring it to your next conversation. I think having that growth mindset, but starting with commitments, building the knowledge from the certifications as well as the conversations, and demonstrating that compounding effect of the improvements and the better questions that you ask the next time will stand you in really, really good stead. And leading with vulnerability as well, because like I always say, I'm a recovering accountant, because like I don't understand, like I couldn't build an application, I don't code, I can't do any of that, but I do know numbers. And if you explain something to me, I'll get the level of detail and data that I require to be able to give you better recommendations to save the company more money. So it's kind of trying to bring them on a journey that you can kind of do together. As Frank said, building that trust and kind of codependency.
And I think you've touched a very interesting point in here. There is in FinOps in general, there is, I don't know why, it always feels that it is the financial people that need to learn tech. But I also think that there is a missing bit in here where you can help, Donald, which is the technical people need to learn finance. And
they're the people spending the money now.
Yeah. Yes.
Because but until now they've never had to, and quite often, I would not say often, but you hear people saying, but they don't understand when I explain about M5 and M6, and I say, well, they don't have to understand. You should understand what they need, how you convert that into a finance language. So that would be one thing. It's just a point that I find disturbing on the fact is fin, which is FinOps, is fin, which is finance. Yet it's still technically driven. It's changing. It's getting better, thanks to you, Donald, partially too. So well done.
I think you brought up two really interesting points, Donald, in your piece. One is the challenge of tracking, and like one of the things we've been talking about recently here is like cost avoidance. How do you track cost avoidance? There've been chats on the FinOps Foundation Slack about it. Right? It is really challenging, because that's when you're doing a great job. It's when people aren't spending it at all. In Syniega, where I am now, we have a background in software asset management item, right? And
welcome back.
And they have a great reputation for saving huge amounts of money on this software estate. But I was
Yes.
talking to them last week. We went for a couple of away days, and we're talking about the data and the complexity of data. And I was just like, look, a big software asset management data set is going to be 100,000 rows, big,
Yeah.
and probably not that many columns. But a small cur is in the millions.
Yes. Small cars in the millions and
Exactly, small. Yeah, it's. I'm not going to say it's more complicated. There's just so much more stuff there, most of which you're probably going to ignore. In reality, there's a huge amount you're going to ignore. You're only going to use a couple of columns, and so actually, our complexity of data is massive because of the amount there. But actually, when you streamline it down, it probably becomes relatively similar. And I think that's a really great example. So a lot of people at the moment are trying to move from ITAM, SAM into that world. And actually, I think one of the biggest differences is the biggest challenge that a SAM person has is getting the data.
Yeah.
Where's it coming from? Looking at your positions in terms of contracts and all this stuff. We don't have that. We have a tap that we can switch on that dumps all of our data for our cost and usage into one place. A bit harder in Azure, to be honest, but similarly easily in Google and AWS. And it's so simple to get that data. It's massive, and our focus is coming. It's really simplifying, but the data is very available.
Yes.
I would say, which I think is unlike a lot of other analyst pieces. Like you say, Donald, once you know how to unlock that, once you can get someone to switch on the cur and you can get access to that S3 bucket, then actually in AWS your life is made significantly easier. And they've now made it easier to get access to the right size manipulation stuff, because that was hard last year. You'd have to go into every single account. My three things, and I'll go more from kind of an architect background, which is kind of business/tech, isn't it? Somewhere in between. Architecting for cloud is a new FinOps framework piece. I think it's a perfect time for people to get into FinOps for architects. I think it's really important because the design phase, I think, has been getting ignored. We used to call it cost-conscious architecture, right, Frank?
Yeah.
That kind of concept where you actually really take into it. And I think carbon-conscious architecture is going to be a big concept as well that I'm driving. One of the things I think people are missing, even if they architect it, what happens is an architect goes and designs this one, hands it over, goes design this one, hands it over. No one's going back and looking at what the change was from design to reality, whether it costs more or less, why, right? That's what architects need to start doing, and what they can do to bring massive value into a FinOps organization or an organization in general is actually doing retros and having a look at why it changed, speaking to the engineers. Okay, I will change my designs in future because this is what you're actually having to do and why, and it's costing this much more or less, so they can get the forecast right. And really, I think you're almost the arbiters of the forecast, certainly for a migration, and looking at and how you drive this into the future. And I think architects are in a great position to have that kind of cost concept, because we always did to an extent. Cost was generally a non-functional requirement previously, and it almost got forgotten. If we ever designed anything big enough, it needed new kit because it took so long to order, right? And the final piece I think the architect can do more easily than a finance person that helps the whole piece, or just a FinOps person, is build your stuff into the engineering process.
Yes.
We were talking about Slack and stuff, so I was looking at some great tools recently which drive automation of right sizing, etc., and just the usage optimization. And actually what they're doing is they're contacting the engineer in Slack.
Yeah.
That's where he lives or she lives, and saying, hey, there's this optimization, do you want me to take you to Git to go and have a look at it? And just putting yourself in their process. I think as an architect, you can do that, and you can help move that whole piece forward. So they're the three things I do. I'd get into the new capability. I'd really make sure I understood kind of cloud pricing as a non-functional requirement. And then I'd build myself into the process and make sure I was reevaluating as well, so that I could further build and defend my forecasts moving forward. And I think that make architects can be massively valuable in that. And I think that's where they have to sit now, because in DevOps it's slightly different. That's where they can help all parties. And they were my three pieces.